Charles Fraser. The Secret of Jack-o'-lantern. The Sherlock Holmes Halloween Special. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production. Back then. "Mr. Oldfield," said the midwife, as she stepped in front of the door leading to the small, gloomy chamber behind her. In her hands, she held a small bundle, which she clutched protectively to her chest. "You have a baby boy." But then the gentle smile that had just played across the old woman's face vanished, and her lips drew into a thin line. "Your wife," she said softly, pausing briefly. Mr. Oldfield's face stared blankly at the midwife. "I'm afraid she didn't make it." She let several minutes pass to give Mr. Oldfield time to understand, but the man continued to stare expressionlessly at the floor. The old midwife took 2 steps towards Mr. Oldfield, carefully extending the small bundle in her arms, but a sudden movement from the man caused her to quickly draw the child back to her protective chest. "I don't want the cursed brat. You can keep him," Mr. Oldfield cried out, his voice choked with tears. "He took my Mary from me." "But Mr. Oldfield," said the old midwife sympathetically, gently rocking the child in her arms, "he is your son. It's not his fault. He needs his father's love now more than ever, and I believe that is exactly what your Mary would have wanted." "My dear wife, my poor Mary," sobbed the man. "It was the work of the devil. He took her from me." The midwife said nothing in response. Perhaps it was better to blame the devil for the death of his wife than this innocent, poor little child. The old midwife rocked the boy back and forth for a while longer, before Mr. Oldfield said in a broken voice, "Give me the boy. Your services are no longer needed here." Hesitantly, the elderly woman handed the newborn to the grief-stricken man. She traced the sign of the cross on the infant's forehead and lovingly stroked his cheek. Then she turned her back on the widowed father and his son, but not before making a silent promise to herself to continue checking on the little boy's well-being. Today, the 29th of October, 1933. "Good heavens, children! Do be careful with that sharp knife," I said, barely able to watch as Patrick and Marie carved grotesque faces into the hollowed-out pumpkin. "But Watson," my friend Holmes tried to reassure me as he slapped the slimy innards of the 3rd and final pumpkin, intended for little Emma, onto the table. "Your first attempts with the scalpel likely looked similar, and you still have all 10 of your fingers attached." Patrick, Marie, and little Emma were the adopted children of our landlady Alice and her husband Eddie. Holmes had rescued the 3 of them, along with Alice, from the clutches of a dreadful criminal couple, after the 3 had previously lived in an orphanage as orphans. I could only imagine with horror what that must have meant for the 3 poor children, and what they had already had to endure and suffer in their short lives. It made me all the happier that they had now found a good, loving home with the Millers, and that Holmes and I were occasionally allowed to play the role of substitute grandfathers. Holmes had meanwhile finished hollowing out the pumpkin and proudly handed it to little Emma. "But Holmes, surely you won't allow Emma to handle the sharp knife as well?" I exclaimed indignantly. Holmes and Emma exchanged a conspiratorial glance, then both began to giggle with delight. "Heavens no, my dear Watson. Whatever are you thinking? Emma will merely draw the face, and you shall do the cutting afterwards." "Me!" I exclaimed indignantly. "How do you suppose that would work? My gout-ridden fingers haven't held a scalpel in years." But Holmes dismissed my objection with a casual wave of his hand. "Oh, Watson, you'll manage just fine. A bit of fine motor practice will surely do your gouty little fingers some good." Little Emma beamed at me across her entire face and pushed her now fully painted pumpkin towards me. Then she tenderly stroked my hand and said, "Dr. Watson, your hand doesn't look that bad at all. True, you have quite a lot of spots and rather a lot of loose skin, but you needn't feel ashamed in front of me when you complain so much. Mr. Holmes has already explained to me why that is. He said you're simply ancient, and you simply can't help it anymore. Dumbfounded and at a loss for words, I stared at little Emma, who was still stroking the back of my hand sympathetically. Then I looked at Holmes, who merely shrugged his shoulders in amusement and immediately turned away from me, probably to avoid laughing directly in my face. Wounded in my pride, I grabbed the scalpel and began snorting as I cut out the grimace Emma had drawn. I saw my hand trembling, but the mouth section was nearly finished. I started on one eye, but then it happened. I instantly dropped the knife, which clattered to the floor, and held my bleeding finger with a pitiful expression. But Holmes was already there, pressing his handkerchief to my wound. "I suppose I was mistaken," he said lightly, which was presumably meant to serve as an apology. "I'll finish that," Patrick hastened to say, picked up the knife from the floor and reached for my unfinished work. "Be careful, my boy," I cautioned him, but of course Holmes immediately picked up on this thread. "Or you'll end up like our good doctor here. Mr. Holmes, why are we making these spooky pumpkins? They frighten me a bit," Marie said cautiously, and all three children gazed intently at Holmes. Not only did the children seem interested in Holmes's explanation, but I too was completely unclear about the reason for this carving and the associated mess. Holmes sat little Emma on his lap and finally began to explain. "As you surely know, we celebrate All Saints' Day on the 1st of November. On this day, we commemorate all canonized and deceased people who lived their lives quietly but strictly according to the Catholic faith. However, there are other customs on All Saints' Day. In Mexico, for example, it is the Day of the Dead, the Dia de Muertos. Here, the streets are decorated with flowers and ribbons, and a massive festival is celebrated. You see, in Mexico, people believe that on this day, the dead return to our world, and they celebrate and laugh together with their beloved departed ones." "That's a brilliant idea," Patrick exclaimed enthusiastically. "Why don't we have that here?" "Oh, some people here have quite a similar belief, even though they celebrate it differently. The night before the 1st of November is called Samhain and is one of the 4 great Irish Celtic festivals. On this night, people believe they have access to beings from other worlds. A fire is lit on the fairy hill and offerings are made to the god of death." "But what does all this have to do with the spooky pumpkin?" Marie was still not satisfied. "To frighten away the spirits on this very special night and prevent them from entering one's own house. That's why people put brightly lit pumpkin faces in front of their houses," Holmes explained. "There is, however, another theory which suggests that the souls of our deceased relatives and friends are thus guided by the light, helping them better find their way to our home." The children stared at Holmes with wide-open eyes. Holmes laughed. "I merely want to illustrate to you that there are many different customs and theories. You needn't be afraid. No ghost will certainly haunt you. You don't even need a pumpkin for that. Your mother is deterrent enough." "Holmes," I snapped sharply at my friend, "I really must protest. I merely mean, which ghost in their right mind would dare to tangle with our good Alice? But never mind that. I think it's a lovely custom to place a brightly lit pumpkin by the door, and I hope, children, that you enjoyed it." Back then. "I say, Oldfield, your good-for-nothing rascal has just chased my 4 hens across the yard, and before that, he pinched their eggs from right under them. Just wait until I catch him. Tell him he'd better prepare himself for a jolly good thrashing." However, Oldfield barely noticed the scolding neighbour. A mere "I'll tell him" barely passed his lips, without even interrupting his work. As soon as the nagging neighbour was out of sight, the aforementioned miscreant dared to emerge from behind the woodpile. "Father, I'm sorry," said the boy, but the mischievous smile around his lips belied his words. "But I did it for you as well," he continued, holding up an egg triumphantly. "The second one unfortunately broke in my trouser pocket when I had to flee from that stupid Wellington." "Oh, Jack," said the father to his son, If you would at least not get caught whilst doing it, and next time it would be wiser to steal the entire hen straight away rather than chasing the creatures across the yard." The father tapped his son's temple. "You must think carefully, my boy. Only crafty people get ahead in life. Honest or not, it makes no difference, as long as you're clever." "I'll remember that, father," said little Jack as he went into the small, crooked hut that the two of them called home. Today, the 29th of October, 1933. When Holmes and I retired for a brief afternoon rest, it was not long before there was a knock at our door. I snorted disdainfully at the interruption, whilst Holmes was already back on his feet, full of energy, striding to personally open the door. "Inspector Wolford, what can I do for you?" Holmes greeted the inspector, and my ears perked up, for this could only mean one thing: my afternoon rest was over. "But please, Inspector, do come in and have a seat," Holmes continued in a sing-song voice, and I could clearly hear the anticipation of a new case, which Wolford's visit would surely bring in his voice. "Good day, Inspector." I also greeted the man and rose from my armchair. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I urgently need your esteemed advice," said the inspector, thoughtfully scratching his chin. "This morning we were called to a crime scene, a private residential address. We have already been able to identify the body. The deceased is Mrs. Anne Hughes, 53 years old. She is widowed, has 2 daughters. The elder daughter lives in the immediate neighbourhood, the younger one somewhat outside of London." "Who discovered the body?" Holmes interjected. "The elder daughter, Olivia Morgan," Inspector Wolford replied. "She had arranged to have breakfast with her mother this morning. When there was no answer after knocking several times, Mrs. Morgan quickly rushed home to fetch the spare key her mother had given her." "Does that mean the front door was locked?" Holmes probed. "According to Mrs. Morgan's account, yes." "And a natural death is completely out of the question?" I asked. "The deceased had a knife protruding from her chest." Inspector Wolford thus answered my question. "I understand," I said thoughtfully. "And why are you contacting me in this case?" Holmes wanted to know. "There are a few peculiarities here about which I would like to hear your esteemed opinion. Would you both be so kind as to accompany me to the crime scene?" Inspector Wolford asked. But Holmes had already grabbed his hat from the hook and was slipping one arm into his coat. Therefore, no further answer from Holmes was necessary, and I took a deep breath before following my friend's example. One last wistful glance at my comfortable armchair, and we were already following the inspector. The few minutes spent driving in the car were passed in silence by the inspector, Holmes, and myself. Mrs. Hughes's small flat was located on the 5th floor, as my aching knee and poor fitness level miserably noted. The officer on duty stepped aside at the entrance door and nodded as he let Wolford, Holmes, and me pass through. I entered and looked around in all directions. The first impression was extremely positive. All the small rooms appeared very bright and pleasantly furnished. "This way, please," said Inspector Wolford, leading us to the last room at the back. There lay the dead Mrs. Hughes. The curtains were drawn, and a gloomy atmosphere prevailed. Mrs. Hughes lay in the middle of her double bed. It almost looked as if she had been deliberately placed there. Holmes's sceptical look and his raised eyebrow led me to suspect that my suspicion was correct. Her arms lay close to her body on either side. Both legs were stretched out straight. She was fully clothed, her grey-streaked hair neatly braided into a plait. She lay there as if she were merely sleeping, if it weren't for the knife protruding from her chest, staining her light-coloured blouse and the snow-white bedsheets on which she lay a crimson red. However, the truly eerie aspect of this crime scene were the 5 lights arranged in a circle around the deceased. The candles flickered and cast grotesque shadows on the walls. "Holmes, aren't those the same sort of pumpkins we carved with the children this morning?" I asked, startled, when I finally realised what was casting such ghostly candlelight. And indeed, all 5 pumpkins were similar in size, as well as in their carving. 2 small eyes and the mouth bizarrely elongated. I shuddered and looked at Holmes. He was pacing around each individual pumpkin, examining them carefully from all sides and even studying the shadows they cast. Then he went to the window and said, "If you'll permit me." He didn't even wait for an answer, but abruptly pulled open the curtains, allowing daylight to finally enter and brightly illuminate the room. Inwardly, I thanked Holmes for this act. Indeed, it no longer looked quite so frightening. "Well, Inspector Wolford, I assume the pumpkins have thrown you off somewhat, and that's why you'd like to know what I make of them," said Holmes. The inspector nodded. "And what do you make of it?" "I cannot tell you what the perpetrator intended by this. However, I believe it is connected to the approaching All Saints' Day. Dr. Watson and I carved similar pumpkins with the children just today. It is a sort of pagan custom meant to keep spirits at bay on this night when the gates to the other world stand open." "And you believe that?" said Inspector Wolford sceptically. "There is much between heaven and earth, that is certain, and ultimately it matters not what you or I believe," Holmes replied laconically. Wolford nodded. "But what does this mean for this murder?" "My dear Inspector, I'm afraid I cannot tell you that yet either. However, what I have noticed is the rather striking pommel on the knife lodged in Mrs. Hughes's chest." Holmes sat down on the bed beside the dead woman and leant over her. "Do you see these intertwined ornaments on the pommel?" "They look like snakes with gaping mouths," Inspector Wolford replied. "Quite right," said Holmes. "I would like to examine the 2 remaining rooms of the flat. Would you excuse me for a moment?" Holmes then left Inspector Wolford and me alone with the dead woman. "What do you make of all this?" Wolford finally asked me. I shrugged my shoulders. "I don't know. It just feels bloody eerie to me." "I understand what you mean, Doctor," said Wolford, and I could see a shudder run through him. This room was surrounded by a frightening aura. It was clearly perceptible to each of us. I was grateful when Holmes returned to us after a short while. "Could you please give me the address of Mrs. Hughes's daughter? I would like to have a word with her," Holmes asked Inspector Wolford. "Here it is." Wolford handed Holmes a slip of paper with a brief note on it. "I have already spoken with her, as far as was possible. The woman was not in a good emotional state, which is, of course, quite understandable. However, she hadn't noticed anything unusual, nor did she know of any enemies her mother might have had." "I can well believe that, but no offence meant. I would still like to speak with the lady myself. She lives just around the corner. Dr. Watson, would you be so kind as to accompany me? And, Inspector Wolford, you need not wait for us." Not even 5 minutes' walk away lived Mrs. Olivia Morgan, the murdered woman's daughter. I was now knocking on the door for the 3rd time, but nothing happened. "Perhaps Mrs. Morgan isn't even at home," I said. "I rather think she is," replied Holmes. "She will need a moment to compose herself. Give the lady a few more minutes." And indeed, Holmes was right, as always. 2 minutes later, the front door opened hesitantly. "Mrs. Olivia Morgan?" Holmes said at once. "My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my partner, Dr. John Watson. We are assisting Scotland Yard with their investigation into your mother's case. If you would be so kind as to answer a few questions." "I have already spoken with that inspector," Mrs. Morgan replied with deep sorrow in her voice. "I'm aware of that. However, I implore you to spare another 5 minutes for us. I promise you it will not take any longer," Holmes promised. "Very well, please come in," Mrs. Morgan said quietly and opened the door for us. The flat appeared very tidy and cosy. Various pictures depicting summer landscapes hung on the walls. "Do you paint?" Holmes observed at once. Mrs. Morgan seemed irritated for a moment, but then replied, "Yes, painting is my passion. But how do you know these paintings are mine?" Holmes smiled. The paintings feel like your home, tidy, friendly and bright, and fit in wonderfully here. Besides, you still have a spot of paint between your thumb and index finger. Mrs. Morgan smiled briefly, but the smile did not reach her sad eyes. Please do sit down. May I offer you something? Tea, perhaps? Please don't go to any trouble. It won't take long. I politely declined. Mrs. Morgan, you have already told Inspector Wolford that you noticed nothing unusual this morning when you went to visit your mother. That's correct. The only thing that made me feel uneasy was the fact that Mother did not open the door when I knocked, so I briefly went back home to fetch the spare key, Olivia Morgan explained. Which brings us to the point, replied Holmes. You said spare key. Is there another key to your mother's flat? Does your younger sister perhaps have one, or another neighbour? No, there are only two keys, the one my mother has and the spare key, or second key, which I have, in case Mother were to lose or forget hers, as she used to say. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Were there any enemies who bore ill will towards your mother? People she might have had quarrels with? No, Mrs. Morgan replied without delay, not taking even a second to think about it. My mother was the most peaceful person I have ever come across. She was helpful, always friendly and caring. A sob escaped her throat. Mother was the most wonderful person, an angel. Everyone liked, loved and valued her. You can believe me. I am truly and sincerely sorry, said Holmes regretfully. I promise you, we shall do our utmost to apprehend the perpetrator quickly. Have you informed your sister yet? No, I haven't yet, and I don't know how I should break this terrible news to Elsie. Elsie is expecting. She's not doing particularly well. She had such problems years ago with her first pregnancy. Mother had advised her to take care of herself and not get upset. Now Olivia Morgan began to weep uncontrollably. I handed her my handkerchief and helplessly patted her hand. Do you live here alone? Is there someone who looks after you? I asked her. My husband. He doesn't know about any of this yet, but he should be home from work any moment now. Holmes handed her another business card with our address in Baker Street and told her to come to us immediately if she remembered anything else. Then we bid farewell to Olivia Morgan, with the unpleasant feeling of having to leave her alone in her grief and pain. When we had walked a few steps away and were looking out for a taxi, I said to Holmes, I don't like your expression at all, old friend. What's troubling you? You mean, apart from the grotesquely staged murder? Holmes snorted disdainfully, but then continued. Olivia Morgan found her mother's front door locked and retrieved her spare key. However, her mother's key was hanging neatly on the key rack just to the right of the wall. There isn't a single sign of forced entry anywhere in the flat. I examined every window myself when I left you with Inspector Wolford. How the perpetrator entered the house could be explained by Mrs. Hughes letting them in herself. But how did the perpetrator leave the flat again when the door was properly locked and no key was stolen? Holmes was right. This thought hadn't even occurred to me. I pondered it, but I couldn't come up with any conclusive explanation. What's your theory? I finally asked Holmes. Either there is a third key to the flat, which Mrs. Morgan definitely denied, or we are dealing with the devil himself. Back then, 10 years later, Jack, you wretched boy, what's wrong with you? Mr. Oldfield scolded his son, who lay panting in bed, rolling his eyes and on the verge of losing consciousness. Oldfield slapped him twice. A jolt went through the boy. Then he vomited loudly over his father's trousers. You're completely drunk. How on earth did you get hold of the schnapps? Liam and I, Jack slurred, before the next surge burst forth from him. Meanwhile, his father held him firmly to prevent the boy from falling out of bed into his own vomit. We stole the schnapps from old Miller. I should tan your hide until you can't sit down any more, Mr. Oldfield thundered. A third, powerful surge burst forth from the boy once again. Sweat stood on his forehead. his father stroked his head once and finally said, "I think the thrashing can wait until tomorrow." Today, the 30th of October, 1933. I lay in my bed, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, as the first rays of sunlight woke me. Pure fear still held my heart in its tight grip. "It was all just a dream," I whispered to calm myself. "None of it is real, all just a dream." But my heart was still pounding wildly. The devil! I had seen him! Holmes and I wanted to catch him and were chasing after him. Then Holmes got hold of him. He grabbed him, but then froze mid-motion. I could still clearly see his contorted face. Suddenly, Holmes had vanished, and in his place stood a pumpkin with a brightly lit grimace. The devil laughed and looked deep into my eyes. He stretched out his hand towards me and beckoned me to come to him with his index finger. But I turned around and began to run, yet I couldn't move from the spot. I ran and ran, but I didn't move a single centimetre. Then, mercifully, I woke up, and so I lay there, with a wildly pounding heart and a fear that put my sphincter on absolute high alert. Should I get up? Or perhaps wake Holmes? No, he would only laugh at me. So I lay there and waited until hours later I finally heard the first sounds in the house. The night was over. The day had begun. Sometime later, Holmes and I sat together at breakfast, though neither of us had much of an appetite. Holmes had been absent-mindedly spreading jam on his bagel for a good 5 minutes, and rather than tasting my own roll, I preferred to watch my friend. Suddenly he said, "When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." "To me, the devil sounds quite impossible in this case," I stated, and immediately the nightmare images from the previous night came flooding back into my mind. Holmes muttered. "But the question is, what else remains here?" "Good morning, and please excuse the interruption." Alice suddenly stood in the doorway. I hadn't even heard her coming. "Good morning, Alice. What can we do for you?" asked Holmes. "Nothing for me, thank you, Mr. Holmes. However, Inspector Woolford is waiting downstairs with his engine running for both of you. Seems to be important." "Indeed, it sounds exactly like that. Watson, I'm afraid breakfast is off the cards today," said Holmes. "I wasn't hungry anyway," I said with frustration, putting aside my roll without having taken a single bite. During the journey to the crime scene, Inspector Woolford brought us up to date. A Mrs. Miranda Ross found her husband's side of the bed empty this morning. She went into the living room and saw the body of her husband, Joseph Ross, lying on the floor. According to her statement, strangely hollowed-out pumpkins with burning candles were placed around her husband. Inspector Woolford sent some of his men ahead to secure the crime scene, but made his way directly to Baker Street to drive us straight to the scene. This meant he had not yet seen the body himself. To be honest, the business with the pumpkins made me uneasy, and I had already considered disposing of our 3 pumpkins in the nearest rubbish bin last evening. The small house of Joseph and Miranda Ross was situated on the outskirts of London. Numerous police cars already lined the narrow driveway. Inspector Woolford parked his car halfway on the street, which did not seem to bother him in the slightest. We hurriedly walked up the driveway. The Scotland Yard officer on duty at the front door greeted us kindly and tipped his hat. "Good thing you're here, Inspector," he said. "The wife is sitting apathetically in a corner and is unresponsive, and none of the men know what to do anymore." "And no one thought to contact a doctor?" Inspector Woolford snapped. "I'd be happy to look after the lady," I offered my help. "That would be nice," said Inspector Woolford, and immediately ushered me into the living room. There sat Miranda Ross, staring at her husband's corpse with expressionless eyes. She appeared absent, and her body, which she held tightly wrapped in her own arms, showed no movement. I approached the woman and beckoned Holmes to assist me. Together, we took Mrs. Ross by the arms and brought her to the adjoining kitchen, finally removing the sight of her dead husband's body from her view. We seated her on a chair. I quickly dampened some cloths and placed them on her forehead and neck. Meanwhile, Holmes had procured a glass of water and held it to Mrs. Ross's lips. Hesitantly, the woman began to drink in small sips and slowly came back to her senses. "I cannot believe this has truly happened," she said quietly. "Why? Why my poor Joseph?" "Madam, I regret that I cannot yet answer that question," said Holmes ruefully. "However, we shall do our utmost to bring the perpetrator to justice swiftly." The woman began to sob. "Do you feel able to answer a few questions yet?" said Holmes. "But not now," I snapped at him harshly. "Yes," Mrs. Ross contradicted. "I shall answer your questions now. The sooner you catch this monster, the better." Holmes's expression revealed a certain respect towards Mrs. Ross. "I shall only ask you the most urgent questions. It shan't take long," Holmes assured her. "For everything else, you may contact us at any time at 221 B. Baker Street." Holmes paused briefly and then continued. "Did you notice anything peculiar yesterday evening or perhaps early this morning? Did you notice anyone who might have been watching you, or did your husband behave differently?" The woman shook her head. "No, nothing of the sort." "Did your husband or you have any enemies? People who bore you ill will?" Holmes continued. "No, not that I know of. Joseph was a very quiet, level-headed character, a life-affirming man with a big heart. Everyone liked him, and I loved him." "What was your husband's profession?" Holmes inquired. "My husband was a teacher by passion. He was extremely well liked by his colleagues and his pupils alike. Everyone's favourite teacher." "One more question, Mrs. Ross. When you left your house this morning to inform Scotland Yard, do you recall whether your front door was locked, or rather, can you say with certainty that you still possess all the keys to your home? Or perhaps, does a neighbour or a good friend have a key?" Miranda Ross pondered briefly before answering. "The door was locked, I'm absolutely certain. There are 3 keys to our flat door. One belongs to my husband, one to me, and one is kept in the kitchen cupboard just behind me. My husband's key and mine are in the small box on the chest of drawers, right as you come through the door. Please, see for yourself." "Thank you very much, Mrs. Ross. You have been most helpful. Is there anything I can do for you in return?" asked Holmes. "Find the monster," said Miranda Ross in an ice-cold voice. "We shall do our best," said Holmes, rising and walking straight to the kitchen cabinet to search for the key. He appeared to have found it indeed, for he gave me a brief, discreet nod. Then Holmes left the kitchen, presumably to verify the presence of the other 2 keys. Meanwhile, I asked one of Inspector Wolford's young officers to look after Miranda Ross. Then I went into the sitting room to meet with Holmes and Wolford. There, I encountered an unfortunately familiar scene. Mr. Lay stretched out on the floor in front of the sofa. The small table that had been there appeared to have been deliberately moved aside by the perpetrator. Around the dead man were 4 glowing pumpkins with their well-known grimaces. A knife protruded from his chest, just as it had with Mrs. Hughes the day before. The same staging, an identical murder weapon, the pumpkins, though 4 of them instead of 5 like yesterday. If the perpetrator continues to follow their pattern, we must expect at least 3 more deaths, Holmes observed. "Damn it," Inspector Wolford cursed. "We absolutely must prevent this. We urgently need to establish a connection between the victims. There must be a link." Holmes snorted. "We do not even know how the perpetrator manages to leave the flat each time, leaving a locked door behind, yet obviously not having a key for it. Something is entirely wrong here." Holmes explained the locked doors to Inspector Wolford. "You mean the fellow comes down the chimney like Father Christmas and disappears the same way?" Inspector Wolford asked sarcastically. "A brilliant thought, Inspector. Perhaps you should question him about his alibi?" Holmes sneered. "Gentlemen," I intervened soothingly, We should review all possibilities once more. There must be a logical explanation for this. Just this morning, a rather clever fellow said to me, "When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." You are right, Watson. One theory would be that the perpetrator had copies of the keys made. In this case, the murders would have been planned well in advance. Or we are truly dealing with something supernatural, I said quietly and almost somewhat embarrassedly. Joseph Ross's wife, Miranda, did not notice anything about the murder tonight. Yet there must have been noises. Under normal circumstances, Mr. would have defended himself. That would have caused a commotion. Moreover, the interval between the two killings seems rather tight to me. I absolutely agree with you, yet it remains within the realm of possibility. Besides, I find it rather difficult to imagine a ghost floating through the keyhole with a knife as a murder weapon, casually stabbing two people while simultaneously setting the mood with candlelight. So we must conclude that we know absolutely nothing. Or do you have any other ideas, Inspector? I asked. But Wolford merely gave a short snort. I'll take that as a clear no, I said. I shall put my men on questioning all relatives, neighbours, friends, and work colleagues of Mrs. Hughes and Mr. Perhaps we shall find a possible connection between the two cases, and thus get a bit closer to finding the perpetrator. That's a good approach, Inspector. However, it's not feasible or achievable time-wise. We'd need quite a stroke of luck for that to work, Holmes joked. But please, it's worth a try. Come along, Watson. We have work ahead of us. Back then, 13 years later, Jack sat behind the school building with his back against the wall, his legs drawn up and his face buried in his hands. The boy wept quietly and softly. Suddenly, someone appeared beside the lad and placed a sympathetic hand upon his shoulder. "Jack, what's wrong with you? Can I help you in any way?" asked Mr. Thompson, his teacher, with concern. Jack quickly wiped his eyes with his shirt sleeve. "Oh no, everything's fine," he said in a hoarse voice. "It certainly doesn't look that way. Come on now, out with it. What happened?" The teacher crouched down beside Jack on the ground and waited. After several minutes, Jack said quietly, "It's Jimmy. He always takes my things away. He beats me up, pulls down my trousers on the way home so that everyone else laughs at me. And I can't do anything about it. He's much stronger than I am." "But you are much cleverer," said the teacher, patting Jack encouragingly on the back. "But that's no help to me. I don't think Jimmy will be impressed if I beat him in a spelling competition. I simply won't go to school anymore," said the boy defiantly. Mr. Thompson had to laugh. "But Jack, you're not going to sacrifice your entire future because of Jimmy, are you? There are chaps like Jimmy everywhere in life. You must face them, not run away from them. And you have a weapon against such types. Your mind. Use it." "And how should I go about that?" asked the boy uncertainly. "Find out what weaknesses Jimmy has. What is he afraid of? Every person has a point where they are vulnerable. Find out what that point is and defend yourself. As I said, you're a clever little chap. That shouldn't be too difficult for you." Jack looked his teacher in the eyes for the first time since the beginning of this conversation. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I believe I already have an idea." "I expect to see you at school tomorrow," said Mr. Thompson. "As I said, running away is not an option. Use your head." Today, the 30th of October, 1933. Holmes and I spent the entire afternoon visiting various antique dealers and the library. It turned out that the knife our perpetrator had used must have been very, very old indeed. Unfortunately, no one dared to narrow down the time period in which it was manufactured. Better still, no one had ever seen such craftsmanship before. The ornaments adorning the knife's pommel clearly indicated Satanism. In plain terms, this meant we hadn't made any progress whatsoever. Perhaps Inspector Wolford might find something out after all, and his approach will be successful. I said wearily as we finally made our way home in the twilight after many hours of research. Bah! Holmes spat out contemptuously. I wouldn't count on that. When we finally arrived home in Baker Street, Alice had already kept our dinner warm. Holmes and I both picked at our food listlessly. Holmes was deep in thought. I could see directly how the new case was tormenting him. Not the slightest trace, not the smallest clue. Nothing. I, on the other hand, had no appetite whatsoever. These murders also weighed heavily on my stomach. And when I thought about the fact that we would most likely be expecting corpse number 3 tomorrow, I felt utterly sick to my stomach. I remained at the table for a few more minutes, but soon thereafter wished Holmes good night and retired to my room. A bit of sleep would do me good. My limbs were aching, my knee was throbbing, and my shoulder stabbed with pain at every careless movement. Should I declare my retirement to Holmes tomorrow morning? But could I really abandon him now? For the first time in my life, body and soul seemed to be in agreement, both screaming simultaneously, "Yes, you can." Yet I tried to push these thoughts aside. I was burnt out and tired. I went to bed and closed my eyes. Suddenly I opened my eyes. My throat! I couldn't breathe. Someone was crushing my windpipe. In panic, I raised both hands to my throat to ward off the constricting hand, but I grasped at nothing. At the same time, I stared into a pair of fiery red glowing eyes. The mouth, a grotesque visage, twisted into a malicious grin. The piercing eyes sparkled at me with amusement. Simultaneously, I felt the grip around my throat loosen and finally disappear completely. Hastily, I sat up and began to gasp and wheeze for air. "Hello, John!" The glowing red eyes breathed at me, sounding almost erotic. "Do you know who I am, John?" Completely perplexed, I could only continue staring at these eyes whilst fearfully shaking my head. "I am your new best friend, John. However, I can also very quickly become your greatest enemy. It all depends on how much you value our newly formed friendship." The grotesque face contorted into a mocking laugh, and I felt fear crawling up my body, threatening to completely engulf me. I trembled, and yet was simultaneously unable to move my limbs. Sheer terror had paralysed me. "You can do something for me, John. A small favour between friends." As if from nowhere, I suddenly held a note in my trembling hand. "Read through the names on it. You can read, can't you, John?" The figure continued to taunt. I nodded once obediently. "Very good." The voice dripped with mockery, and never in my life had I felt so lost as in this moment. "Get on with it," the figure demanded, a touch more harshly. "And loudly, if you please." I opened my mouth and wanted to read the first name on the list, but nothing happened. Not a sound would pass my lips. I cleared my throat desperately and prayed fervently that it would work now. Too terrible were the thoughts of what the figure might do to me if I did not comply. I tried again. "Anne!" God be praised and thanked. This time my voice had not failed me. "Read on," the voice demanded once more. "Joseph," I said, stuttering. "Continue," the figure commented. "Blake. And then—" "Nancy," I whispered almost. "And finally a question mark. That will be a surprise," the figure trilled smugly. I did not understand, but I did not dare to ask. Yet the figure saw right through me and read my face like an open book. "Let me explain it to you very slowly, my dear Johnny. So, Anne and Joseph have already been dealt with. Next up is Blake. You will kill him for me first thing tomorrow morning. This is very important, do you understand? Otherwise, I'll have scheduling problems." The figure burst into loud, mocking laughter. "Will you do that for me, Johnny?" The glowing eyes winked at me seductively. "Of course, a good friendship is always based on give and take. In this case, I would either return your beloved deceased wife Mary to you, or take your pathetic life. The choice is yours." My heart was pounding in my throat. Had the figure really said that? I could have my Mary back, my Mary. But how? How am I supposed to do that? And which Blake am I meant to murder? "Oh," the figure trilled cheerfully, "I'm certain it will be the right Blake. And don't worry, simply set off, and I promise I'll help you and give you further instructions when the time comes. After all, we're a team from now on, aren't we, Johnny?" The figure whispered hoarsely in my ear, and another shiver ran down my spine. "You may keep the note. See you soon, Johnny." Today, the 31st of October, 1933. "Watson, what's wrong with you?" I saw, or rather sensed, my friend leaning over me and patting my cheek. Slowly, I returned to the here and now. "Can you hear me, Watson?" Holmes tried again. I nodded, and a faint yes passed my lips. "Thank heavens, you gave me quite a fright, old chap. Here." Holmes handed me a glass of water. "Drink this, it will do you good." With still trembling hands, I reached for the glass and spilt a little. I took a small sip, then another. "I'm feeling better now, Holmes. Thank you," I said, still sounding shaken. "Now tell me what happened. I was beginning to worry, you know. You were lying here with your eyes open, staring at the ceiling and not noticing me at all. You appeared completely apathetic." I believe I was. I paused briefly and sat up. Then I took another large sip from the glass of water. "Holmes, this is all so unreal. I don't even know where to begin, or whether I should tell you at all," I said uncertainly. "Nonsense. I promise not to laugh," said Holmes, raising his right hand in an oath. "What makes you think the story is amusing?" I protested indignantly. "You're already able to get worked up. You're feeling better. Now, don't make a drama of it. Just tell me. Straight from the shoulder," Holmes urged me. I took a deep breath and began to tell Holmes. "I had a nightmare, but one of the truly dreadful sort, and I swear to you, everything felt so real. I can still precisely recall the fear that I felt, and believe me, never in my life had I experienced such unbridled, pure, raw terror." "You had a dream," said Holmes, rolling his eyes. "You will listen to my bloody story until the end, Holmes. I won't let you dismiss me as some crackpot." I flared up. "Might I recommend keeping a diary for that purpose?" Yet I ignored Holmes's rudimentary comment and continued. "I awoke because suddenly someone was cutting off my air and I could not breathe. Then I saw glowing red eyes and a distorted face that smiled at me. The figure told me that it would become my new best friend if I killed the people on the note it gave me. In return, I would get my Mary back. Should I fail to do this, I would die myself." The mere thought made me shudder once again, and I began trembling anew. "What book were you reading last night?" asked Holmes. "None," I said, irritated. "Then I suppose our current case is taking quite a toll on you," Holmes deduced. No, that's not it. Holmes, the devil himself appeared to me in my dream, and I'm not entirely certain whether this was truly just fiction." "Come now, Watson. It was merely a dream, nothing more." "You do not understand," I said disappointedly, propping myself up with both hands and attempting to climb out of bed when I suddenly felt something. I reached for it and held the note from my dream in one hand. Horrified, I stared at it. "What is that?" Holmes inquired curiously, but I could not answer his question. Instead, I read the names on the note once again. Anne, Joseph, Blake, Nancy, and a question mark. "Come now, hand it over," said Holmes impatiently, and snatched the note from my hand. "What are these names? Where did you get this note?" This is the note from my supposed dream," I stammered. "Impossible," countered Holmes, yet he could not tear his gaze from the piece of paper. "This is not your handwriting," he observed after a brief moment of examination. "I did not write the note," I said, rather snappishly. So, you mean to tell me that you received the note from the devil himself, and furthermore, he commissioned you with the murders of 3 more people. Do I understand that correctly? Holmes asked sceptically. In general, you have summarized that correctly, I replied. Holmes sat down next to me on the bed, still clutching the note firmly in his hand. Very well, Watson. I believe you. However, I haven't the faintest idea how we shall explain this to Inspector Wolford. Despite the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but smile. The next victim on the list is called Blake, I said. Do you have a surname for me? Asked Holmes. No, unfortunately not. The devil said I would choose the right one. Ah, the devil speaks with ease, said Holmes mockingly. And you have no further clues? No, I do not, but I should set off early this morning and get it done. Then come along, Watson. Let us see where it takes you, Holmes suggested casually. Back then, 23 years later. Jack, if you truly wish to marry this girl, you ought to reconsider your way of life a bit, scolded the local vicar. Parson, I'm not here to be lectured, but to arrange the banns. So when are you free? Would next Saturday suit? Jack asked impatiently. The vicar smiled mildly. First of all, my son, I would like to hear your confession and absolve you of your sins. Jack held his stomach with laughter. Then he burst out. First of all, I'm not your son. Secondly, there's nothing to confess. My conscience is spotless. Jack burst out laughing again. Very well, said the vicar indifferently. Then I shall also refuse to marry you to this innocent young lady. Jack slammed his fist on the church pew. You will not. Do not cross me, old man. The vicar smiled mildly down at the hot-headed youth once again. What are you afraid of, Jack? Unburden your soul, let God guide and lead you, accept him, and I promise you he will show you the right path. I know that one, but I'm not afraid of anything or anyone. Very well, old man, then listen carefully. I steal, lie and cheat, I drink and whore, and I do all these things with passion. Is that what you wanted to hear? Yes, Jack, you have confessed to me the contents of your life, so you know perfectly well that it is fundamentally wrong. You are clever, but wouldn't it be more sensible to use your intelligence for other things? Jack dismissed this remark with a single wave of his hand. And if you try to drink less, I hardly think your future wife will appreciate a perpetually drunken husband. That's none of your business, Vicar. Right, I've poured my heart out to you. Now it's your turn to keep your part of the bargain. Wedding, next Saturday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. See you then. Jack, one more thing, the vicar called after him. Life isn't always easy, and one often makes the wrong decisions. If you need help or wish to unburden your heart, you know where to find me. Today, the 31st of October 1933. We walked along Baker Street, turned into the next side street, and then back onto the main road. I simply let my feelings guide me, and Holmes willingly followed. His look told me that he still did not seem entirely convinced of the matter. But what else could he do? Suddenly I stood in front of our church. Holmes laughed sarcastically. Watson, surely you don't wish to request Christian assistance? Slightly confused, I replied. Perhaps that wouldn't be such a bad idea. Who, other than God, could possibly defeat the devil? Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, Holmes fired back like a shot. Careful, my friend, that borders on blasphemy, I scolded him. But all at once, Holmes's expression turned serious. What's the matter, Holmes? I asked worriedly. Our vicar, his name is Blake Bancroft. Come quickly, Watson. We hurried into the church. Holmes suddenly stopped abruptly. You haven't by any chance brought your old army revolver? Or perhaps a knife? Anything you could use as a weapon? I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an object. Holmes's breath caught for a brief moment. "Don't worry, it's only my pillbox." Holmes rolled his eyes. "Now, come along, Watson." A whiff of incense still lingered in the air, but inside the church there was no one to be found. "The morning service has already ended," I observed. "Father Bancroft," Holmes called loudly through the church. "Are you still here somewhere?" "I believe Father Bancroft has already gone home. Perhaps we should look there?" I suggested. But Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, I don't think so. Look, the large candle is still burning at the altar. He must be somewhere here." I hurried to the confessional and hesitantly opened the door, filled with dread at what might await me. But the confessional was empty. "Look up there, at the ceiling. There's a faint glimmer of light. Quick, Watson, come with me up to the gallery." I hastily followed Holmes up the steps and could already make out a shadow at the top of the landing. The shadow looked like a grinning grimace, and I knew at once. We had arrived too late. Father Blake Bancroft lay flat on the ground, stretched out like the victims before him. 3 glowing pumpkins surrounded him. However, it was not the familiar knife that was lodged in his chest, but rather his large crucifix protruding from his ribcage. Instead, he held the familiar knife in his folded hands. "He was murdered with the knife. Look, the blade is covered in blood. Our murderer then simply swapped the knife for the cross. Our devil appears to have a sense of humour," Holmes commented dryly. "Yes, quite the amusing fellow," I agreed. At the same time, I looked around in all directions. I had not fulfilled the devil's task, and now hoped I would not suddenly receive my comeuppance. "Are you nervous?" Holmes asked me. "No, all is well. Why should I be? After all, we are in a house of God. However, the priest lies dead before us, stabbed with his cross in his chest. The devil himself wanted me to kill him and threatened me with death if I disobeyed. As you can see, there's no reason to be nervous. The devil probably has a few more employees, and one of them is particularly conscientious." Whilst Holmes thoroughly examined the crime scene, I pressed myself against the wall and planned the direct escape route, just in case. "Nothing," said Holmes bitterly. "Not a single trace. Our devil probably employs his own cleaning crew to destroy evidence alongside his henchmen. Come, Watson, let us inform Inspector Wolford about victim number 3. I looked once more at the dead man. "Rest in peace, Father Blake Bancroft." We had returned straight from Scotland Yard to Baker Street when Holmes was already about to leave again. "Where are you going now?" I asked him. "To the library, of course," Holmes replied. "Ah, and what do you expect to find there? The latest guidebook titled Tips and Tricks for Devil Hunting?" "Watson, you are always so negative," Holmes sighed. "But perhaps a small exorcism would do you some good." "Well, I'm afraid it's already too late for that. Father Bancroft, God rest his soul, will hardly be able to perform one anymore." "That is unfortunately true, but perhaps I might even find a small guidebook titled Exorcism Made Easy, 10 Simple Steps to Devil Banishment for Everyone." Holmes winked at me. "Take good care of yourself, old friend. Eddie will be with you straight away and keep an eye on you." Before I could deny that this was not necessary, Holmes had already gone out the door, and to be honest, I was deeply grateful to Holmes and Eddie for that. 23 years later. Dejected, Jack sat in the front pew of the church. Blasted woman! Why hadn't she come? He had specifically worn his good trousers today and washed his neck and ears, now that Vicar was standing next to him again, placing his hand on his shoulder. "God's ways are unfathomable," the man said to him. But Jack deliberately ignored it. He would never admit it, yet he was truly hurt. He had liked Myra very much. She was the only one with whom he could imagine the "till death do us part." He took out the hip flask from his jacket pocket again and took a deep swig. He felt the liquid burn pleasantly down his throat. He loved that feeling. and he decided that from today onwards he would love that feeling once and for all more than women, or even Myra. He raised the hip flask to his lips for a second sip, but the vicar held him back. "Don't you think that might be the root of all evil?" Jack laughed bitterly. "This is the only thing that always stands by me and is always there for me. This is my best friend." You are responsible for your own friends. Perhaps you should seek better friends, my son. Never forget, God and I are always here for you. Even though Jack did not take the advice given to him by the father seriously, he still felt accepted in his presence. In a certain way, he liked him. Thus, he was one of the 4 few people whom he allowed to share in this feeling. Today, the 31st of October, 1933. It was already late in the evening when Holmes finally returned. However, he did not remove his coat but said to me, "Would you fancy joining me on a little excursion?" "At this hour? Have you even looked at the time?" I protested. "Precisely. Put on something warm and come along. Alice is already waiting in the car," Holmes insisted. "Alice is driving? Then this won't be a pleasant outing but my direct route to meet my new friend in hell," I thundered. "Where are we even going?" "That, my friend, is a surprise, but I think you will like it." So I did as I was told and followed Holmes to the car. We drove outside of London. The area became increasingly rural, and I slowly began to wonder what we were doing here. Finally, Alice stopped and turned off the engine. Nothing but meadows, woods, hills and shrubs. "We're here," she said enthusiastically and got out of the vehicle. Holmes and I followed suit. "And what are we doing here? Stealing firewood, or do we have a corpse to bury? Nobody would find it out here," I said grumpily. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," Alice replied. She walked along the narrow path, lighting our way. As time went on, the path became increasingly difficult to traverse, and I struggled to make progress on the ever-steepening terrain. "Be careful, Dr. Watson. If you fall and break something up here, we'll actually have to bury you here." These prospects did not improve my increasingly gloomy mood. Panting and sweating, I followed Alice and Holmes. "Come along, Watson. We're going on a little excursion," I grumbled to myself. And like a fool, I actually came along. "We've made it! We're here!" Alice suddenly exclaimed. I couldn't see anything yet, but when I went over the small hilltop, I saw it. A blazing fire with women dancing around it. "What are they doing there?" I asked, simultaneously astonished and impressed. "My friend Iris is one of the dancers. The women are celebrating Samhain. Tonight is the night when the gates to the other world are wide open," explained Alice. "Come along. We can sit a bit apart and watch the spectacle. They must have only just begun." Alice, Holmes and I sat down on the blanket Alice had brought beneath a shrub. Suddenly, one of the women began to sing. Then the other women joined in. It was magnificent singing, somewhere between hope, supplication, gratitude, and lamentation. The fire blazed ever higher, and the dancers, too, began to move more ecstatically. Then the singing ended, and a drum began to sound. The dancers moved in rhythm. The women's hair and garments billowed in the firelight, and I was simply spellbound by the spectacle. "Thank you, Alice, for bringing us here," I whispered, leaning towards her. "It is quite impressive, isn't it? The ancient customs that so many have already forgotten or dismiss as nonsense. Death alone creates new life. The fire protects against negative energies and brings light and warmth into the cold season," Alice explained. However, I barely registered the last sentence. I felt dizzy, my muscles suddenly tensed, and I heard a rushing sound in my head. An alluring voice began to whisper softly. I suddenly felt as if in a trance. Then I stood up and walked towards the fire. I heard Holmes and Alice calling after me, but it triggered no reaction within me. The women were still dancing to the rhythm of the drum and their singing, and at first they did not even notice me as I ran directly towards them. but one of them drew me in magnetically. A woman with flowing blonde hair and a billowing white dress had apparently caught my attention as I headed straight for her. She only noticed me when I was a small distance away from her. She stopped in astonishment and looked at me with her large blue eyes in amazement. I made a leap, and I was myself surprised that my arthritis-plagued body was still capable of it, and I jumped at her with full force and knocked her to the ground. I immediately placed my hands around her throat and squeezed. Her terror-filled eyes burned into mine. I felt the pulsing of her carotid artery beneath my hands, registered how I was cutting off her air. She thrashed about and tried to defend herself, but I suddenly had incredible strength. I felt her running out of air, and she was in the process of slowly but surely dying. But I could not stop. I wanted to, but I could not release my hands from her throat. With a forceful blow to my head using a fallen branch, Alice broke the spell, and I released my grip on the poor woman. My head throbbed, and for a brief moment my world began to spin. What remained was a painful pounding in my skull. I looked down remorsefully and incredulously at the woman, who still lay on the ground staring at me in horror. I am truly, deeply sorry, I stammered. I honestly have no idea what came over me. Please, Words failed me. I felt shame and anger towards myself. How could I possibly do such a thing? Why? Holmes and Alice knelt beside the woman and inquired after her well-being. However, apart from a pressure mark on her neck and quite a fright, she appeared to have suffered no further harm. I must apologise for my friend. He has never done anything like this before. He is a doctor who has spent his entire life doing good, but since his mind has become unclear, he occasionally experiences these lapses. I shall send him back for treatment first thing tomorrow, Holmes told the woman. At first, I wasn't quite sure whether Holmes was merely serving the woman a flimsy story to somewhat excuse my behaviour, or whether he genuinely believed that I was no longer quite right in the head. "Madam, might I inquire as to your name and address?" Holmes trilled. "Simply so that I may check on your well-being tomorrow and convey a small token of our regret." "My name is Nancy Culligan, and I live at 57 East Street," the woman replied in a distressed manner. "Nancy! For heaven's sake, your name is Nancy?" I cried out, shaken. Holmes and Alice looked at me in astonishment. "What is so peculiar about that name?" Holmes asked uncomprehendingly. "The list, Holmes. Nancy is the fourth name on it," I answered, with growing hysteria in my voice. Holmes turned deathly pale at once. Today, 1st of November, 1933. It was well past midnight when we finally arrived home at Baker Street. The descent from the hill was more than arduous, and Holmes and Alice had to take turns supporting me to get safely back down. So violently were my knees shaking and my legs giving way. Not even Alice's driving could unsettle me after that. Now I lay in my bed. Alice had already said her goodbyes, and Holmes had administered a large glass of whiskey. He now sat on the chair in my room and had been silently observing me for quite some time. I could not bear it any longer and scolded, "For heaven's sake, Holmes, talk to me." "The devil is the key word, dear Watson," Holmes replied contritely. Then he fell silent again, and I stared at the ceiling. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke again. "What happened to you up there? Never would I have thought you capable of such a thing." "Believe me, neither would I," I replied dryly. "The poor woman. I saw the mortal fear in her eyes. Holmes, how is such a thing even possible?" "Well, I am not the expert in occultism, but I would say that in that moment you were not yourself and were possessed by something. And I dare say that the devil himself had a hand in this." An ice-cold shudder ran through me and I began to shiver. "I fear you are right," I said meekly. "But the question is, what can we do about it? We have dealt with quite a few characters in the past who behaved like the devil's right hand. but I have never had the pleasure of meeting the head of hell personally," Holmes summarized. "However, we could draw one insight from today. After your blackout today, I am almost certain that it is not the devil himself, but a person of flesh and blood who commits or has committed the murders. This means we have a human perpetrator, which may make things a bit easier. And now, try to get some sleep, dear friend. Exhaustion is written all over your face." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, only to open them again. "Holmes, I am afraid to fall asleep." It took some effort to admit this, but what else could I do? "That is completely understandable," Holmes agreed. "But you need not be afraid. I shall remain seated here with you for the first half of the night, and Eddie will relieve me for the second half. We shall not take our eyes off you for a single moment and will wake you immediately should we notice any sign that you might be having a bad dream." "Thank you, Holmes," I whispered, and closed my eyes. I was somewhat calmer about the prospect of not having to be alone and grateful for it, as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, and within seconds I had fallen asleep. Back then, 29 years later, "Are you Mr. Oldfield's son?" asked the nurse. Jack nodded. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but your father will not survive the night. You can say goodbye to your father now. I am not sure if he can still hear you, but he will sense your presence, and I think none of us should die alone." Jack wasn't sure whether his father deserved it or not. When he received the news this afternoon that his father had suffered a serious accident, he first finished drinking the bottle of schnapps, then hurried to the hospital. His father had been on horseback on his way to visit an acquaintance when the animal suddenly spooked. His father fell off, and the horse ultimately dragged him for miles. His injuries were so severe that it was immediately clear that old Oldfield would meet his maker today. What should I say? Jack took another deep swig from his hip flask. "You are my father. I learned from you. I love you, and at the same time I hate and despise you. I won't particularly miss you." Jack thought about himself and his father as he sat beside his bed, looking down at him and observing how his breathing rattled heavily with each breath. His father's head was one massive blood clot, his limbs were broken, and his internal organs were certainly severely injured. Yes, he would die. That much was certain. Yet the grief wouldn't come. Rather, it was a frightening indifference. A thought occurred to him. Finally, he could completely take over his father's business and be the only blacksmith in town. He would earn good money, but would also have to work hard for it. Jack wasn't entirely sure if he wanted this. Until now, he had only worked as a smith for his father when he had no money left and couldn't currently swindle any either. The nurse came back into the room. "Can I do anything for you? A glass of water, perhaps?" she asked him sympathetically. But Jack waved her off with a laugh. Water? He sensed that his reaction was inappropriate, but the nurse overlooked it and placed her hand compassionately on his shoulder. "Everyone deals with a loss like the one you're experiencing differently. That's perfectly all right," she said kindly. "What's your name?" Jack asked her bluntly. The nurse blushed slightly but replied, "My name is Nancy, and you are?" "Jack." "Then I'll leave you alone again now, and if you need anything else, please don't hesitate to let me know." The woman was nice, thought Jack. Since Myra had left him at the altar, he hadn't let any woman get emotionally close to him. Sure, he had been with numerous prostitutes, but there wasn't much talking involved, which always suited him just fine. But this Nancy was simply friendly. "Jack," he suddenly heard. His father groaned as he had opened his eyes for a brief moment. "My son, murderer of my beloved wife and your mother. Had I been able to choose between your life and that of your mother, you would not exist today," old Oldfield croaked. Jack didn't let it show, but these words felt like 1,000 needle pricks straight through his heart. How he had missed his mother when he was still a little boy. what he would have given just to see her once and feel her closeness and love. But it wasn't meant to be. Certainly, many children grew up without a mother, or without both mother and father. They all grew up, but he couldn't deny that the painful absence of his mother always haunted and preoccupied him. "Go to hell, old man!" Jack burst out. Mr. Oldfield's eyes suddenly bulged. A stifled cough escaped his throat. "May the devil take you, my son!" the old man choked out. The old Mr. Oldfield closed his eyes. His battered body convulsed, and with one final desperate gasp for air, he breathed his last. "So, this is how we shall meet again," said Jack, and it sounded like a promise. Today, the 1st of November, 1933. The night passed surprisingly quietly, and I awoke fresh and, given the circumstances, well rested. I saw Eddie sitting beside me in the armchair. His head was bowed, and I could hear him snoring loudly. A smile came over me. Then my bedroom door opened a crack, and Holmes peered in. When he spotted Eddie, he merely shook his head disapprovingly. I slipped out of bed and into my trousers, left Eddie sleeping, and hurried to Holmes. "I'm pleased to find you safe and sound," said Holmes. "No bad dreams? No apparitions?" my friend inquired with concern. "Thank God, no," I replied. "Very good," I said to Holmes. "I shall make my way straight to your, shall we say, acquaintance from last evening and inquire after her well-being. Would you care to join me?" I pondered briefly. "Do you think that's wise? What if I should try to kill her again?" Holmes swung his walking stick ominously. "Then I shall give you a good thrashing with it. Besides, I'd like to keep an eye on you, and am rather reluctant to leave you here alone." I nodded. "Would you care for a little something to eat?" Holmes asked me. I declined. "Very well, I can happily forgo breakfast as well. In that case, I suggest you quickly freshen up, then we can set off straight away." A thought suddenly struck me, as Nancy Culligan's residence was only a few streets away from Baker Street, and Holmes and I had decided to walk. What if Nancy Culligan had fallen victim to another of the devil's henchmen during the night, and they had managed to carry out the plan? The closer we got to our destination, the more nervous I became. With a trembling hand, I knocked on the door of the small flat on the second floor. After the third knock, the door hesitantly opened to a small crack, and we heard a timid woman's voice. "Yes, please?" My heart stopped for a moment. Thank goodness she was alive. "Mrs. Culligan, how lovely to see you," I said effusively. She studied us for a brief moment and then said, "You're that madman from last night, aren't you? Go away." She was about to slam the door in our faces, but Holmes was quicker and wedged his walking stick into the tiny gap. "Mrs. Culligan, please, just a brief moment. Listen to me. Do you live alone, or is there someone who could stay with you today and tonight?" "Why is that necessary? I don't understand," asked the woman, irritated. "Please do us the favour and do not stay alone today. If you wish, we would be happy to accompany you somewhere," I said, trying to appear as friendly as possible. But Mrs. Culligan merely said, "You surely understand that I will not go anywhere with you. Besides, my fiancé will be here any moment." "Nancy, darling, is there any trouble?" came a concerned male voice from the stairwell. "No, not in the slightest," Holmes interjected before Nancy could reply. "Please take good care of your future wife today. With that, we shall take our leave." Relieved, and with a clear conscience that Nancy Culligan was still amongst the living and would be in good hands and looked after for the remainder of the day, we made our retreat to Baker Street. From afar, we could already see Inspector Wolford's motor car parked, and he appeared to be engaged in an animated conversation with Alice. She spotted us first and waved to us. The inspector then turned his head in our direction and, upon recognising us, immediately rushed towards us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, how fortunate that you are finally here. We have another body," he said, completely out of breath. Holmes and I looked at each other for a brief moment. Then Holmes said, "The woman's first name is Nancy." One look at Inspector Wolford's face was enough, and we knew we were right. "How do you know that?" asked Wolford, completely surprised. "We have our very special sources," Holmes answered conspiratorially. "Mr. Holmes, if you are withholding facts and information that are significant to the investigation, then I hardly need to explain to you." But Holmes interrupted Inspector Wolford. "I can assure you that this information is of no concern to you, as you would be able to make just as little use of it as we can." With that, Holmes considered the matter closed. "Can we finally drive to the crime scene?" I was extremely surprised when Inspector Wolford drove us directly to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. "Did the woman survive the attack?" I asked, astonished. But Inspector Wolford shook his head. "The woman's name is Nancy Rogers and she's a nurse. She was on duty last night and was found dead in the nurses' station early this morning during the shift change." "Oh God, how dreadful!" I exclaimed. And the thought occurred to me that if our Nancy Culligan had indeed died yesterday, then this woman here would likely still be alive. Had I decided between life and death? Once again, I felt absolutely terrible and deeply regretted this woman's death. Nancy Rogers lay stretched out in the middle of the small nurses' station. The small round table and the 2 chairs had been pushed aside to create enough space for the familiar staging. 2 pumpkins surrounded the nurse's corpse, one to her right, the other to her left. The familiar knife with its ornately decorated handle protruded from her chest. "Let me guess, Inspector," said Holmes. "Once again, nobody noticed or saw anything. No peculiarities and no strangers. Nancy Rogers was a very compassionate woman, friendly with everyone, and an excellent caring nurse who conscientiously carried out her duties." "It's not written word for word exactly like that in my notebook, but in summary, that's spot on," confirmed Inspector Wolford. "Now out with it. I want to hear how you know all this." "But Inspector," said Holmes, "these character traits were also present in the other victims. One could say that each of them individually was a good person and a valuable member of the community. Furthermore, we have not been able to find any traces at any of the other crime scenes, nor identify any suspicious persons." But Inspector Wolford was not satisfied with this explanation. "Don't take me for a fool, Holmes. I want to know how you knew the name of the deceased." "Very well," said Holmes. "Dr. Watson received a note from the devil himself in a dream with the name written on it." "Of course," Inspector Wolford spat, almost at our feet, turned around, and left the crime scene, shaking his head. Holmes could not help but smirk about it, but I was in no mood for laughter. Nancy Rogers, a young woman in her mid-30s, number 4 on the list of death. We knew the name. We knew it would happen today, and yet we could not prevent it. I am sorry, Nancy Rogers. Terribly sorry. Back then, 33 years later. "Hey, Stingy Jack, where are you lying about again, you drunkard?" echoed through the small smithy. The agitated man searched every single corner for Jack. Finally, he found him behind the house, snoring on a bale of straw. He kicked him firmly in the side with his boot. Jack startled awake and shouted, "Hey man, are you mad? Waking up a hard-working man like that?" "Hard-working? Don't make me laugh. I brought you my steed this morning. He's got 1 new horseshoe on. But Jack, imagine that. My steed has 4 hooves. Either you sort this out right now this instant, or I'll personally nail those things under your boots." All right, Jack grumbled, and rose cumbersomely from his resting place. His head was throbbing and his side was hurting. One couldn't even enjoy a well-deserved afternoon nap. Under the watchful eyes of the agitated man, Jack kindled the fire for the horse's iron. He heated it until it glowed, then placed it with tongs onto the anvil and began to work on it. Testing it, He lifted it up again with the tongs. That looked quite good already. "Hey, Smitherson, lift the horse's hoof so I can fit it better," Jack called out to the man. "Don't you have your apprentice for that? Where is he? You haven't paid him again. Have I got that right? He's run off again." "No, the lad is ill again," Jack lied, and not very convincingly. Reluctantly, Smitherson lifted his horse's hoof, and Jack approached with the glowing iron. He pressed it onto the horn, but his tongs slipped, and the glowing iron fell directly onto Smitherson's hand. He let out a pain-filled scream and jumped back hastily. The horse was startled, shied away, and kicked out with its hind legs. It struck Jack directly in the stomach. He was catapulted backwards, and it knocked the wind out of him. "You worthless drunkard! You got what you deserved. I'll get my nag shod in the neighbouring village. You won't see another penny from me," Smitherson scolded. Jack remained lying in the dirt, cursing his father's inherited forge and his life. He decided to retreat back to his straw bed with his half-empty bottle of spirits to nurse his wounds. Today, the 1st of November 1933 evening had fallen, and after my experience yesterday, I dared to go to bed alone again today. It did not take me long to fall asleep. "Johnny, open your eyes. It's me. You're Mary," whispered a seductive voice. "Mary?" I asked incredulously. "Yes, Johnny, it truly is me. Oh, how I've missed you. Do you remember back then? How happy we were? When you had your medical practice and I worked in the library? How I keep thinking about that time over and over. But now we can be together forever, my darling." "But Mary, you are dead," I said stupidly. "Johnny, don't worry about such trivial matters. You know exactly what you need to do. Or have you stopped loving me? Am I not worth it to you?" Was that really my Mary? My heart beat faster as I recognised her voice, a renewed, shared future for eternity. I yearned for nothing more. "Johnny, tomorrow you must do what you are told. Do you hear? You mustn't fail again this time. Oh, Johnny, how I need you." "But Mary," I replied, "I cannot kill anyone for that." "Oh, yes, you can." The voice suddenly turned brutal, intimidating and threatening. Suddenly the figure was there again, sitting on my bed. The glowing eyes fixed upon me, and I was unable to look away. "Your Mary is suffering terribly with me," the voice screamed at me. "Save her, Johnny! Free her, Johnny! Be a man and not this old, pitiful coward!" Fear shot through me once again, and my hands began to tremble. When the figure saw this, it let out an evil laugh. "Your Mary is burning alive with me. She's screaming. She's in pain, Johnny. Terrible pain." Then, in the background, I heard the voice of my dearly beloved wife once again. "Johnny, please do this for me." But suddenly I realised that this could not possibly be my Mary. Never, not even once, had she called me Johnny. The only one who called me that with such a condescending tone was the devil, when he appeared to me 2 nights ago. "If you do not fulfil your duties," said the devil, stretching his hands towards me, "then I have a small parting gift for you. You will need it, Johnny. You will think of me, my friend, and curse me." He handed me his present, and a dirty laugh washed over me. "Watson, for heaven's sake, wake up my friend." Holmes's voice and his tugging hands pulled me from this nightmare. I opened my eyes and suddenly became completely lucid. "Mary, she spoke to me, Holmes. She wants me to commit murder," I stammered. "My dear Watson," Holmes tried to speak soothingly to me, "that most certainly was not your Mary. Think clearly, Watson. What could Mary possibly have to do with the devil? It is unthinkable." "You are right, I know. She called me Johnny. She has never done that before, but it was frightening." I began to tremble again, and I could feel the beads of sweat on my forehead. Then I remembered the gift that the devil had handed to me. I looked around searchingly in my bed, but I could not find anything. "Have you lost something?" inquired Holmes. "No, but the devil handed me a gift that I am looking for right now. He said I would need it. Is that so? What was it then? Holmes pressed on. It was nothing exciting, I said, yet the thought of it made goosebumps cover my entire body. It was a simple vegetable. It was a turnip. Holmes looked at me with wide eyes. A turnip? Yes, that's what I said, I exclaimed irritably. But why does that interest you now? Dr. Watson, our murderer's name is Jack. Back then, 35 years later, it was the night before Samhain. Jack was leaning against the bar in a pub. He had spent his last penny. He thought about his father, about when he was still a little boy and his father had explained to him that it didn't matter how one earned money as long as one was clever about it. Oh yes, he had always been a clever little chap, but that hadn't really got him anywhere so far. It was high time to return to his true calling and hang up his life as a blacksmith on the proverbial nail. He rummaged in his pocket and searched it again for a coin. But they were just as empty as when he had last searched them 10 minutes ago. "Hey Jack, how are you?" asked the man suddenly, who had appeared out of nowhere and was dressed entirely in black. He smiled at him mischievously. Jack was not in the mood for conversation. "What's it to you?" he snapped at the stranger. But the stranger was still smiling, and suddenly his eyes began to glow red like fire. Jack stepped back and observed him carefully. What a brilliant trick that was. He wanted to be able to do that too. "Hey mate, how do you do that with your eyes? It's enough to give one the shivers," marvelled Jack. The man in black blinked twice, and the red in his eyes vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You should be afraid, Jack. You should truly be frightened of me. I am your lord and master, the king of the underworld. I am the devil himself, and I am here to collect you." Jack burst out laughing and held his stomach. "God's greetings to you," he mocked. The man's hand shot forward and gripped his throat. Sharp nails dug into his skin, and Jack gasped for air. Suddenly the man's eyes glowed red again, and Jack could see the flames flickering within them. Placatingly, Jack raised both hands in the air and tried to swallow. The devil loosened his grip and smiled at him once again. "Jack, I must confess, I have been watching you for a long time and I admire you. You lead the life that I envision, and that is why I want to invite you to join me." "That is very kind," replied Jack. "However, I am not a very sociable person. Rather, I am a loner, a hermit. Therefore, I would like to politely decline the invitation." The smile on the man's face died, and he hissed. "That was not a request, but an insurmountable fact. You are coming with me." But Stingy Jack remembered his father again and what he had taught him. So he said, "I will gladly go with you. However, I have one very last request. I will happily give you my soul if you first buy me a drink." The devil thought briefly and had to laugh. "That can be arranged." The devil also rummaged through his pockets, but had to realise that he was not carrying any coins. So he quickly transformed himself into a coin to pay for the drink. However, Jack snatched the coin and hastily put it into his wallet. In his wallet, Jack always carried his father's silver cross. Thus, the devil could not transform back and remain trapped in Jack's wallet. "Well, what do you say now? Will you withdraw your invitation?" asked Jack. The devil's voice rang out. "You damned bastard! Release me at once! How dare you imprison the devil?" "Because I can," Jack taunted. "I shall grant you and your corrupted soul another 5 years on earth before I come to collect you. What say you?" the devil proposed. "Make it 10 years and we have an agreement." "Agreed," replied Jack, opened his wallet and let the devil go. Today, the 2nd of November, 1933. Holmes and I had spent the rest of the night together in the living room. We sat in our armchairs whilst Holmes explained to me the connections between the turnip, the pumpkins, and Jack, which according to legend occurred on a gloomy night during Samhain. To be honest, The story sounded like utter nonsense to me, but for Holmes, it seemed to make perfect sense. Now we just need to find out why number 5 on today's list is marked with a question mark. Who is meant to be the 5th corpse? Holmes pondered. The devil's macabre games, I mused. A thought occurs to me. Looking at the matter logically, the question mark can only refer to someone we either know or should not know, namely, the murderer himself. The murderer himself? But if the murderer is suddenly meant to play the victim today, how is the deed supposed to take place? I pondered. The thought cannot be entirely dismissed. However, I fear that this is where you come into play. Our main actors are a demonic devil. Though perhaps this is Jack himself, I'm not quite certain about that yet. Then there's our murderer, and finally you. According to my deduction, one of you 3, or rather 4, should become the 5th corpse today. And to be honest, my money's on you, Holmes stated. And you just tell me that so cold-bloodedly to my face? I said indignantly. Looking at it soberly, yes, he replied. I was lost for words. The devil was planning my death for today, and all Holmes could do was look at the matter soberly. I suggest we find out as quickly as possible who our perpetrator is. Only then do we have a small chance of averting the inevitable, he said dryly. Whatever might save me from eternal existence in hell, I'm in. Back then, 45 years later, 10 years after his first encounter with the devil, Jack was once again sitting in the pub on All Hallows Eve, drinking his drinks. It had grown rather late, and he was one of the last 3 patrons. There had been no sign of the devil thus far, so he cheerfully decided to head home. Or should he perhaps visit one of the brothels instead? The little redhead had caught his fancy, although during his last rendezvous, the thought had occurred to him that, because of the hair, it might even have been the devil himself providing him with pleasure. He rather liked that thought. Thus, he also liked the girl. He smiled in anticipation. Yes, he would visit the brothel first. However, when he finally knocked on the door, requested entry and asked for Melissa, the house's madam told him, "Melissa isn't here today. The silly thing has vanished without a trace. Come back tomorrow." With that, the woman, reeking of alcohol and sweat, slammed the door in his face. Disappointed, Jack wandered off and actually wondered whether his suspicion regarding Melissa had been correct after all. "Hello, Jack," a seductive voice sounded behind him. There he was again, and not a single day too late. "Hello, Satan," Jack greeted back. He had pondered for a long time about another encounter and thought about how he could outwit the devil again. Nevertheless, now that it was actually happening, he was very nervous indeed. "Ready to descend into hell with me?" the devil asked casually. "Ready if you are," Jack grinned. The devil pondered briefly, then said, "Stingy Jack, or Drunk Jack, or whatever pet names the people from your village have for you. You have truly lived your last 10 years. I am proud of you." The devil flattered him. "I am very pleased," Jack replied. "And since we understand each other so well, I have one very last request of you." The devil pondered. He remembered all too well what had happened 10 years ago when Jack had asked him for a favour. "I cannot promise you that yet," he answered. "First tell me what it is about." "But of course, old friend, I wish for one last meal from you, and it shall be an apple. Here, from this tree, right here." The devil examined the tree very carefully, and when he could not detect any danger to himself, he agreed. So the devil nimbly climbed up the tree to pick the apple for Jack. Jack, however, swiftly drew his knife, the good one he had also inherited from his father, the one with the beautiful ornaments on the handle, and carved a cross into the bark of the tree. How often he had practiced this procedure over the past 10 years. And indeed, it had worked. The devil sat high up in the tree and could no longer climb down. "I've caught you again," Jack triumphed and mocked the devil. Grant me another 10 years on earth and I shall let you down again, Jack proposed. No, said the devil with forked tongue. You let me down and I shall leave your soul in peace for all eternity. That is even better, Jack thought to himself, and subsequently removed the cross. However, at that moment, he was not yet aware of what the devil's promise might truly mean. Today, the 2nd of November, 1933. Holmes and I had paid a visit to Scotland Yard. We asked Inspector Woolford if we could examine all the investigation files. With a smug expression, he handed them to us and said, "Perhaps it wasn't so unwise after all to document all the connections, friends, relatives, and acquaintances." "That was certainly not unwise, Inspector, and after all, it is part of your work. However, neither have you prevented another murder with it so far, nor are you able to deduce any connections from it. Would you be so kind now?" Holmes asked politely. Annoyed, Woolford handed him the requested files. We withdrew to a quiet corner with them and went through the various contacts, dates, and names. "Inspector Woolford's men have done a thorough job," Holmes noted appreciatively. "Perhaps you should tell him exactly that. Your relationship has seemed rather strained as of late," I said in response. Holmes briefly looked up from the files and let out a consenting grunt. "Do you remember the first body, the midwife Anne Hughes?" asked Holmes. I nodded. "Of course, Holmes." Mrs. Hughes had 2 daughters, the elder one, Olivia Morgan, who had also found her, and a second one, Elsie Field, who lived somewhat outside the city. The surname was previously unknown to us. "Quite right, Holmes," I agreed. "Don't you think that over the years Oldfield might have transformed into Field?" Holmes pondered. "Thus, he would be the son-in-law of the deceased, and perhaps a very distant descendant of the true Jack Oldfield. And do you remember what the elder sister, Olivia Morgan, told us about Elsie? She had experienced such problems during her pregnancy years ago. This means for us that the son-in-law could have known the teacher as a parent of a pupil, just as he could have known Father Bancroft and Nurse Nancy Rogers. Now I could see that gleam in Holmes's eyes that I had missed over the past 5 days. He had finally found his trail. He was very close, and he could feel it. "Inspector Woolford!" he shouted. The inspector came to us moments later, and Holmes immediately posed his question. "Do you happen to know the name of the husband of Mrs. Hughes's younger daughter, our first victim?" Woolford pondered. "Is that not noted?" he asked irritably. "No, unfortunately not, although I must praise your otherwise complete documentation to the highest degree. Really excellent work, Inspector." Inspector Woolford's expression visibly softened. The murders of the past few days had taken their toll on him as well, and an outspoken recognition from Holmes soothed his battered ego and noticeably gave him renewed strength. "Summersby, would you please come here for a moment?" Inspector Woolford called to one of his subordinates. A thin, small man hurried over at once. "What can I do for you, sir?" "Summersby, you have an excellent memory and recorded the interviews with Mrs. Hughes's 2 daughters. Do you happen to recall the full name of the younger daughter Elsie's husband?" "Of course, sir. The man's name was Field, Jack Field." A triumphant smile appeared on Holmes's face. Even the devil himself could not have chosen a more suitable murder suspect. Back then, 75 years later, Jack Oldfield's time had run out. He had lived his life. He had drunk and whored and pulled off the odd dodgy deal. When he noticed that morning, right after waking up, that he was no longer able to get up, he reached for the bottles of spirits he had hoarded on his bedside table and had literally drunk himself to death. His heart had finally ceased operating and stopped beating in the afternoon. Now the time had come. Shortly thereafter, Jack stood before the gates of heaven and asked for entry, but a man named Peter merely laughed mockingly and said, "Jack Oldfield, you cannot be serious. Do you really think you can make yourself comfortable up here with us and compete with the angels in drinking? You are most certainly in the wrong place. If I were you, I would try presenting myself 2 floors below." And the man named Peter slammed the gates of heaven in his face. Very well, thought Jack. Who wants to be in this boring heaven anyway, when one can have it nice and warm and exciting in hell? So he finally made his way to hell. At Hell's Gate, his old acquaintance the devil was already waiting for him. "God's greetings," the devil sneered, just as Jack himself had once done. "But no, you can't say that. Nobody up there wants you." "I like you, devil," said Jack. "We two will surely get along well." And Jack made to step through the gate, but the devil stood in his way. "No, my friend," he said. "There is no entry for you here, or have you already forgotten what I promised you back then? I will leave your soul in peace for all eternity, and believe me, Jack, eternity is a bloody long time." "Is there nothing I can do to make you take back your promise?" asked Jack hopefully. "Let me think for a moment. I'll be generous. Bring me the souls of the 5 people who ever meant something to you or were kind to you in life. There would be the soul of the midwife who brought you into the world, Anne, your teacher, Joseph, the good-natured, albeit slightly dim-witted priest Blake, the nurse Nancy, who had cared for your father so heartbreakingly, and lastly, the soul of Jack Oldfield. He was always the most important to you." Jack seemed confused. "How am I supposed to do that? Everyone except me is in heaven, and I am damned and cannot sacrifice myself to you." The devil laughs loudly. "Then you must return to where you came from." But it was dark and windy, and the path was long. So finally, the devil took pity on Jack Oldfield. He gave Jack a glowing coal straight from the fires of hell. Jack placed the coal in a hollowed-out turnip that he had brought as provisions for the journey and went away. Since then, his damned soul has wandered through the darkness with the lantern. Today, the 2nd of November, 1933, Holmes and I were on our way to Jack Field's residential address. As we had further learned from Mr. Summersby, his wife, Elsie Field, had been visiting her sister, Olivia Morgan, since learning of her mother's death. We hoped to find Jack Field alone at home. The journey was extremely quiet. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. Holmes was likely pondering the connections and links between the devil and his intentions. I, on the other hand, was preoccupied with the notion that today might be my last day on earth. "Holmes, you know that I wish to be buried next to my Mary?" I asked my friend, thus tearing him from his mental fabrications. "I would also like white lilies on my grave. Moreover, might I ask you, as my long-standing companion and best friend, to deliver the eulogy and obituary for me?" "But of course," Holmes promised me. Yet I was disappointed and made no effort to hide it. "No, but Watson, you won't die today," or a "Don't worry, Watson, nothing will happen to you." "My dear friend," Holmes began, "I cannot promise you anything that I am not 100% certain I can keep." "Well then, today, 5 days ago, Jack wandered through the centuries in the gloomy emptiness and darkness of the in-between world. But now, as every year, the time had finally come. Samhain was at the doorstep, and the gates to and from the in-between world stood wide open. Over all these years, during those 5 days, he had done his homework. The souls of his 5 significant people had long since returned to Earth and were, as centuries ago, busy with their life's tasks. Now he needed a plan. He would simply disguise himself as the devil and persuade the person, the poor fool who had taken his place in life, to kill them all. Jack Field, as fate would have it, worked as a pumpkin seller, and rather unsuccessfully at that, as Jack noted with patronising satisfaction. So he appeared to him on the first day when the barriers of the worlds merged, on the 29th of October, and seduced him. He knew how to lure the innocent Jack Field. After all, he was but a shadow of his former self. He promised him eternal life and alcohol, as much as he could carry. And that wasn't even a lie, for he wouldn't receive more than he could carry in the gloomy emptiness of the in-between world. He instructed his new self and solemnly handed over his list. Now he would only need to wait and occasionally take the greenhorn under his wing. But wouldn't it be wise to have a plan B up his sleeve? And devil's coincidence sent 2 old men right around the corner, who bought 3 pumpkins for their grandchildren. One of them looked very cunning, and Jack had a bit of respect for him, but the second one seemed a little lost, and thus he made his perfect choice. Today, the 2nd of November, 1933, Holmes and I knocked in vain at Jack and Elsie Field's front door. "There seems to be nobody home, or perhaps we're too late," I lamented. "Holmes, step aside. I shall try to break down the door." But Holmes did not step aside. Instead, he simply turned the doorknob. "It's open," he said with superiority. We entered. Inside, a gloomy atmosphere prevailed. The curtains were drawn, and a strange smell of smoke filled our nostrils. I looked around and could make out a faint candlelight flickering from the adjoining room. "Holmes, in here," I showed my friend my discovery. "Be careful, Watson. Give your obituary the chance to remain unheard for a while longer." "Perhaps it would be better if you went first," I said, quickly pushing aside my budding overconfidence. When we entered the room, we both froze. Jack Field was lying on the floor, but he wasn't dead. No, he was alive and looking at us with alert eyes. "Mister, are you quite all right?" Holmes asked with concern, which in my opinion seemed rather excessive, given that the little fellow before us was responsible for 4 murders. "Don't come any closer," Jack Field screamed. Only then did I notice the solitary pumpkin which had found its position above his head. It glowed brightly and cast a wildly distorted grimace as a shadow upon the wall. Suddenly I heard that seductive voice again. It was Mary's voice. "Johnny, how lovely that you're here. Do you see the man lying before you? He alone is the reason why we cannot be together yet. But look closely. He is sacrificing himself. Quick, end it. Stab him." And suddenly I held a knife in my trembling hand, one with an ornately decorated pommel. I did not know what was happening to me, and this trance began to lay over me again, practically swallowing me whole. Hesitantly, I stepped towards Jack Field lying on the floor. I felt a firm grip around my upper arm holding me back. "Watson, no, do not do it!" But I did not react to Holmes's calls. I wanted to, but I could not. Yet lightning fast, without hesitating for even a second, Holmes leapt at me, wrested the knife from me, spun around, and thrust it into the heart of the figure with Mary's voice. Instantly, the trance state fell away from me, and I stared at the figure, which I believed to be the devil himself. But then his face changed one final time. It was Jack Oldfield. His shocked gaze remained fixed upon his own knife in his chest. "How can you kill me?" Jack Oldfield spoke in a choked voice. "You are here in our world, drunk Jack. In our world one can die, and I am sending you exactly where you belong, to the in-between world for all eternity." Jack Oldfield's figure slowly collapsed before completely dissolving into thin air. The second Jack on the ground had meanwhile lost consciousness and was now slowly coming round. We shall hand him over to Inspector Wolford. Whether Holmes would tell him the truth or serve him some tale, I could not say at this point in time. The shock ran deep in my bones, and I could barely keep myself standing. "Watson, look there," Holmes urged me, and pointed to the last pumpkin. Slowly, the light began to flicker, and the flame grew smaller and smaller, as if someone were depriving it of the oxygen it needed, until it finally extinguished completely. "Jack has arrived at his eternal damnation," Holmes explained. "Well, those who deal with the devil—" "Or with you," I interrupted my friend with a relieved grin. You are listening to Charles Fraser, The Secret of Jack O'Lantern, the Sherlock Holmes Halloween Special, based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production